Long-awaited figures on legal and illegal migration in the year to June 2024 were released this morning, with the latter going up. Now, this comes as reports suggest the government is planning to relax freedom of movement rules with the European Union to allow yet more young Europeans to come and live and work in the United Kingdom. Well, let's discuss this further now with our Homeland Security editor, Mark White. Mark, welcome to the show. So James Cleverly has been parading around today trying to claim this as a victory. Of course, these are historic figures from the Conservative Party's tenure. But Mark, when you dig a bit deeper, the fact of the matter is 286,000 work visas were granted last year alone. That's a city the size of Newcastle, and the asylum cases have tripled in 1 year to 68,000, a 40-year high. Mark, the politicians might try and spin this all they like. Is this really a country taking back control of its borders?
Well, listen, there's a lot to drill down into. James Cleverly is right to an extent that the figures are going down, but it's a modest victory at best, and I'm not exactly sure it's worth crowing about, because if you take that 286,000 work visa, add into that families, dependents and student visas, the combined total of the visas granted over the last year to June was 1.2 million, just over 1.2 million visas that were granted. And then just on the work visas, if you take the 286,000 work visas and then add into that the fact that they've taken family and some dependents over as well, then that takes you to more than 500,000 visas, just work-related visas. 432,000 student visas were issued. That's slightly down. Again, that's due to the fact that quite a number of students have had restrictions put on the dependents, family members that they can take over. So it's down about 14% or so. So it's going down, he is correct, but it's modest in comparison to the absolutely huge numbers that we've seen for years now with immigration. And what we don't have, of course, are the Office for National Statistics results, which will come out later in the year, which will then tell us what the net migration figure is. So, OK, 1.2 million visas have been issued. How many people left the country? And you might find that, well, we know over the last year, we were talking 750,000 people were net migrants in this country. It'll have dropped down a bit, but it will still be extraordinarily high. I would say more than 500,000 by the time we get those ONS figures, Martin.
Astonishing stuff. 1.2 million visas. Mark White, well done. You've been through this data all throughout the day to really drill into it. It's so important. We cross-examine this data. The politicians, as I said, they've been trying to spin this as a victory. Mark White, a lot of people will look at that and say, 1.2 million visas granted. That doesn't feel like we're stemming the tide anytime soon.
No, there are definite issues to be addressed in terms of what our legal migration figures are. And we've yet to see really what this new Labour government will do in terms of its policies with regard to visa applications and visas that are granted at the end of the day. I mean, there are these reports, of course, in the Times today suggesting that the government is seriously considering a system whereby those under the age of 30, so we're not even talking 18 to 21, they're classed as young people, but under 30 is a significant old chunk of the workforce who would effectively be given free travel within Europe. If this was to come off, it would be a reciprocal agreement where people from this country under the age of 30 could travel to the European Union to work or study, and then people from the European Union could travel to the UK. Now, certainly, of course, some people from the UK will go, But as we've seen in the past, many more people from the European Union, from those poorer countries in Southern Europe, from Eastern Europe, will come to work in the likes of the hospitality industry. So I think if this scheme was ever put into practice, the numbers coming versus the numbers leaving here would be significantly more.
Mark White, superb analysis, very sobering data there. Thank you very, very much. And a lot of people will be looking at that and wondering, is this what I voted for in Brexit in 2016 and every election since? Now let's cross over now live to Clacton-on-Sea and speak to Jimmy's reporter Ray Addison, who earlier in the day was with Nigel Farage. Ray, give us some analysis of what people in Clacton are telling you about this data.
Well, good afternoon, Martin. Yes, we've come down to Clacton today for the air show. It's taking place right now. Thousands of people have come to the town to look at the Spitfires and the helicopters flying ahead, and it's given us the opportunity to talk to local people and get their views. And the general feeling, the consensus is that although legal immigration has come down somewhat, I believe it's around 11%, people here in Clacton believe it's still too high. It's putting a strain on public services. They've mentioned examples where themselves, their friends and family have been unable to get housing while they've been waiting for long periods of time, and also waiting to get on register with a dentist, or also long waits in for the NHS with emergency services and the like. When it comes to illegal migration, we know that those numbers seem to be pretty steady. However, there's a fear that it's costing the taxpayer billions and billions of pounds every year. They believe that that money could be better spent on things, just simple things like potholes and the like, just to make the everyday life of people who live here in Clacton a little bit better. Now, Labour is saying they're getting very tough on illegal migration. They're saying they're introducing another 100 National Crime Agency investigators, and also introducing tougher policies for businesses, so they could get fined if they hire illegal workers, or they could even do a little bit of bird as well. I got the chance to talk to the leader of Reform UK and the MP for Clacton, Nigel Farage, and I put to him that Labour is getting tough on immigration.
I've heard it all before. Priti Patel said all the same things. If you employ illegal migrant workers, we'll fine you. You may go to prison. Massive penalties for smugglers. Life imprisonment. None of it. And you could put 1,000 new enforcement officers in place. But if the European Court of Human Rights stops you deporting people, what difference does it make? Are very clear that a country is not a country without controlling its borders, and you'll never do that with that activist foreign court in Strasbourg, which, remember, stopped that plane taking off to Rwanda back in 2022. We are clear that is the first step.
Can't let you go without asking you about these Labour plans to potentially relax freedom of movement rules with the European Union, to allow young people to come and live and work here, and our young people vice versa to go and live and work in Europe. What's your response to those plans?
Some of our young people will go to live and work in Europe, but many, many more from Europe will come and live and work and settle full-time here. And many of them may be lovely people, but our population explosion is the biggest social problem we face in Britain. Whether it's housing here in Clacton, whether it's access to GPs or dentists here or anywhere else, a 10 million increase in the population since Blair came to power has devalued the quality of life of everybody. It can't go on.
So quite a lot of scepticism there from Nigel about that concept of freedom of movement for the under-30s across the European Union, and that's been echoed by the people that we've spoken to here. They say, well, if you don't know how many people are coming into the country on any one day, month, year, how can you plan, how can you resource for that? Of course, as I said, Labour, though, very, very keen to stress. Home Secretary Yvette Cooper saying that they're taking strong and clear steps to boost border security and ensure that the rules are respected and enforced. I think people here in Clacton need a bit more convincing in the whole.
Superb stuff there, Ray Addison. Great reporting all day from Clacton-on-Sea. Thank you very much for that update. Now, for more reaction on this story, let's speak now to the Research Director at the Centre for Migration Control, Rob Bates, who joins me in the studio. Rob, it just struck me as astonishing when we look at those numbers that Mark White just analysed. 1.2 million visas granted in total last year. This was on the Conservative Party's watch. It's important to point out this isn't a Labour issue. This was a Conservative issue. And yet we had James Cleverly doing the rounds earlier, claiming some sort of victory because 11% down. But 11% down from a massive total is still 286,000 work visas granted in 1 year alone. What's your take?
Well, I mean, we're fiddling at the margins if we start going on about the 11%, and ultimately what the Conservatives are trying to claim as a victory is them undoing a lot of the damage that they inflicted on the country in the first place. It's their fault that we entered into the system of mass migration with the health and social care visa route, the graduate visa route as well. Both of these have inherently compounded the problem that we are facing with this mass migration crisis. I think James Cleverly is obviously trying to make hay of this in his leadership bid, his ill-fated leadership bid, and I think what we'll see is the conversation in the Conservative Party stagnate and almost accept that this was a victory and it was a triumph of Conservative nous. I think it was far from Conservative nous. I think, as we were just hearing from Ray there, the people of Clacton are thoroughly fed up with the mass migration betrayal that has been inflicted on them over the last 20 years. Repeatedly, we've been promised that the numbers are going to come down to the tens of thousands, maybe lower. And instead, we seem to have had a system for the last few years with 500, 600,000 net. The figures today suggest that it will probably stay around about 400 to 500,000 for the foreseeable future, and I don't see what Labour Party are planning on doing that will actually bring that down any further. Or
even more to the point, on the same day, there's another rumour of a freedom of movement deal with the European Union for the under-30s. Now, we saw what happened last time. Hospitality workers, students, plumbers, decorators, truckies coming in and taking working-class jobs. It's an astonishing thing to put out on a day like today. You can see in your figures there, look, of the small boat arrivals. Afghans make up 18%, Iranians 13%, Vietnamese 10%, Turkey 10%. Turkey, I mean, it's not an unsafe country. Syria 9%. Now, you can see that list there, Rob Bates. A lot of those are from countries that we simply cannot return them to because they will claim or their human rights may be affected if they go. So the small boat arrivals seems to be something, no matter what Yvette Cooper says, can we actually send any of these people home?
No, well, we can't send them home. As long as we remain a member of the ECHR, it will be incredibly difficult to actually send anyone effectively home. Obviously, Yvette Cooper has been making the right noises, well, trying to make the right noises, talking about deportations, but the 100 staff that she's recruited seems an infinitesimally small number given the scale of the problem. The backlog now is at record high of 118,000, and as far as I can decipher, what the Labour Party have actually offered thus far is to deal with that crisis is an effective amnesty to those who have entered the country. We have about 90,000 people in this country that were, earmarked as being eligible for deportation to Rwanda, yet they remain in this country. They remain taking up those 4-star accommodation places. They're costing us £5.4 billion a year. All the while we have, pensioners worrying about the winter fuel allowance being cut and this ominous-sounding black hole. Well, if it's that ominous a black hole, let's do something to address the asylum backlog, which is a huge, huge white elephant that we get nothing out of and actually ends up enticing more people to make those crossings across the Channel.
OK, Rob Bates, superb stuff as ever. Of course, Yvette Cooper has promised to deport 14,000 by the end of the year.